Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, and welcome back to Tech Takeaways. We've been a little away for a little while we've been thinking about some of the shows that we want to do. But what we wanted to do was to give some shows kind of short term. So we've kind of come for a bunch of specials. So you'll notice a couple of changes. One, there's no Wayne, which is you take that as you need as a positive or a negative. And we're also in a slightly different studio. So we're doing these shows thanks to our next door neighbours and good friends at the Anfield Wrap, who've allowed us to use their studio. And as a Liverpool fan, this is very exciting for me to be here doing that. So anyway, I won't mention that anymore. So it's just me and Jason. So Jason, how you doing? How you been?
Great,
since the last show?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, been a little bit heavier because Christmas and all that, but it's good. It's good to be back. It's a nice new studio. So yeah, it's good.
It's exciting. Change is as good as a rest,
as
they say.
Yeah.
On today's topic, what we wanted to kind of dip into is something that bizarrely is one of our favourite topics.
Yeah.
And something that I think we both feel doesn't necessarily get thought about to quite the extent it should do when we talk about cybersecurity, or cybersecurity particularly.
Yeah.
And that's everybody's favourite cat to kick. Not that I'm advocating kicking cats for any moment. But most people's favourite cat to kick is DNS, because when something goes wrong, it's always
DNS.
So, Jace, why don't we start with, why is DNS one of your favourite IT topics?
Well, as you know, I love DNS.
You do.
And when problems go wrong, it is often DNS, hence the phrase, it's always DNS. But yeah, I mean, DNS is one of these, fundamental mechanisms that make essentially the internet work, make networks operate in an efficient manner. So when we're talking about DNS, we're talking about domain name service. So the translation from google.com when you type it into your web browser to the actual IP address that is hosting the website. So it's a fundamental part of the way that networks and the internet works, because the internet's obviously just a big network. But it is often overlooked, as you say. I think it's just there. Everyone takes it for granted, and it's DNS, don't really need to worry about that. But actually, the opposite, as we know, is often true. They do need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I think actually you make a really good point in that it's so fundamental to pretty much everything we do. It's kind of the it's the phone book, and for youngsters, actually, what one of those is. Well, one of those is, but it's the phone book for using the internet. But it's also the way actually that we communicate internally. So it's the way that your laptop finds your application. It's the way your laptop finds the next user on the network. So we use DNS extensively. And because we use DNS extensively, the thing that it makes it is a high priority target for cyber attackers. And it's kind of a double-edged thing. It's something that cyber attackers will look to use a lot to try and compromise accounts, compromise access to services. But it also means that it gives us, and this is why I think both of us wanted to talk about this in something that's overlooked. It also gives us the opportunity to handle cyber attack much earlier in the attack chain if we look properly at how we secure DNS.
Yeah, that's right.
So in terms of the threats that comes with DNS from a cybersecurity point of view, can you give us some examples of where you've seen that as an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when we're talking about DNS requests, we're talking about someone using a name, at google.com, and it ended up on a web page somewhere. So a great example when we're talking about security with that is spoofing, domain spoofing. So instead of google.com, it's google.com, but with a 1 as the L. So to the human eye, it looks like google.com, but actually it's not. When you use that with phishing emails, that page could look like, say, a M365 login page designed to compromise credentials. So it's a phishing attempt designed to obtain some credentials and then use them credentials at a later stage in a cyber attack to then get into the account and get into the network and maybe access some data. So when we look at DNS in that way, and we say, well, what is this web page that the user's trying to go to? What's the reputation like? Does the web page have a reputation because people have gone to it before and it's a known good web page, or does it have no reputation because it's literally just being created with the sole purpose of phishing email? There's a link in a phishing email to that page. When the user clicks it, obviously it then goes that way. So I suppose that's the interesting part to me, because it's just so often overlooked. We speak to a lot of customers, and they've got quite a good grasp on incident response, endpoint security, firewalls. You say, okay, what are you doing about DNS? And I'm like, well, but nothing. Or, oh, well, we've not really thought about that. But there are services that will look at those DNS requests and block them.
Yeah.
Policy-based block as well. So you could say, set up a policy within your organization that says any device that goes to this web page, if it's not in one of these categories, so it's not been seen before and categorized, just block it. And that's really effective about against phishing attacks, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that kind of whole thing with DNS in that it's so important to the way that we talked before about it's so important to the way you communicate with services. So, hijacking that communication channel is a really important tool that cyber attackers have, because like you said, you gave examples there of you think you're going to a site, somebody has stolen kind of the way, so they may have dropped a piece of code on your machine that's hijacking all your DNS requests, may come somewhere further up the chain, but they're making that request, getting redirected somewhere, then putting in what they feel is appropriate credentials or appropriate information. That information then gets stolen. But of course, there's other elements of this as well. So I think one of the things that I see is the idea that actually, if somebody deploys some malware that's then going to talk to a command and control service, well, one of the things that you know about that service is that the only way that malware is getting to the service is it's making a DNS request to do so.
Absolutely, yeah. And on an endpoint, because that endpoint is likely to have some kind of protection software on it, that may be blocked. Like not all AV vendors are going to block it, but a lot will. But it's devices that are on your network that are networked, like printers, for example. Printers can be compromised. Yeah. They run a web server. They can be compromised in exactly the same way. You can't put endpoint software on that. So how do you secure it? How do you stop it from getting out to that web page? The only way to do it is to look at those DNS requests and intercept them en route. So, when we're talking about DNS protection, we're not necessarily talking about something that sits on the machine itself. We're talking about a service that sits within a network that will essentially look up the URL against the DNS protection service. So things like security cameras. So with I'm not going to name any names, but there's some questionable IP camera manufacturers out there.
For legal reasons, don't name names.
Exactly. I'm not. But they can be compromised, as well as printers, as well as anything else that sits on your network. So we need to pay particular attention to them because they can be used as jump-off points to the rest of the network. So services like Quad 9, so 9.9.9.9 as a DNS server will do some security for you. That's a free service. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that, but essentially that will do reputational-based protection for websites that have been seen before, and will block access to web pages that haven't. So that's a real quick and effective way of getting quite a good level of security set up.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's one of the things that it's kind of why it's one of our, I think, subjects of interest, because actually solving the problem is so much easier than people realise.
It really is, yeah.
Quite a lot of cybersecurity issues that we're trying to solve are quite complicated. So, and we're seeing people invest in increasingly, things that are using analytics, artificial intelligence. You talked before about threat detection and response and MDR services. People are spending a lot of money on those services, but actually DNS, and there's a benefit to dealing with DNS, because we kind of talked about it. It's almost the first part of any attack chain that something is going to make a request to something else. Yeah. So if you can stop that part of the attack chain that early on, the amount of things, so, you identify something beaconing out to a command and control service and you can block it there and then. But even, you talked before about some of that idea of, domains that are close to. So, so there's a whole bunch of things that you can look for from a DNS point of view. So if you've got a good threat intelligence service, there's a whole bunch of things you can look at that are good early indications of potential attacks.
Absolutely.
So, people registering domain names that are similar, so kind of that DNS typo type attack. People who are using domain generation algorithms. So you suddenly see a creation of a whole bunch of kind of spurious email that are clearly being generated by an algorithm. Yeah. But all of these things are kind of signs of potential attack. Actually, if you take the time to put things in place, you can stop these. You can be very, very proactive in addressing these things. So there's lots of benefits, I think, to dealing with DNS. But
absolutely.
I mean, you've touched on some of the easy stuff that you can do in terms of things like DNS filtering. So the idea that you can, block sites based on reputation, block sites based on category. So you don't want people accessing
inappropriate content at work. Yeah.
Again, good word for legal reasons.
Yeah.
I was going to name a whole bunch of sites, but probably best I don't. So, but is there any other things that you've got experience of people doing to help secure DNS? And bearing in mind, I appreciate people might be watching this and thinking, well, you're only talking about outbound. We'll talk about inbound maybe on a different show because there's a whole bunch of things there. But is there other stuff that you've seen that people could be doing to help secure DNS?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it for starters is probably the first one. Yeah, think about what it is and what it means in the network. And you mentioned about companies deploying endpoint software to devices. Well, this kind of covers the places where it can't be installed. So that's quite nice. But you're absolutely right. Anyone that owns a domain name has records associated to that domain name, which is in a lot of cases fundamental to the way that they do business. So, gardnersystems.co.uk is our domain name, and there's IP addresses listed to that to third-party services that we use. Any kind of compromise on that DNS record could mean that people trying to visit our webpage are redirected to a illegitimate site, a malicious code on that site that is designed to attack them, essentially. Or it could just be disruption of service. So we've seen a lot more organisations paying particular attention to their DNS records, being a lot more aware of it, and doing kind of basic steps of go to your DNS control panel, turn on MFA, make sure that people can't get on there. But also things like when we talk about email, so people setting up DKIM and DMARC so that when you send an email out, it is guaranteed that it is from you because it's come from your domain and that's validated by the DNS records that are in that domain. Anyone that was attempting to then spoof would fail those checks and the emails would be automatically junked. So that's quite important.
And they're good examples of kind of proactive DNS security as well, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, they're using DNS as part of your security.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned earlier about the kind of early indicators of an attack, because in most cases, I think the statistic is somewhere between 85 and 90%, depending on who you ask, but there's normally always an indicator before the attack. And DNS outbound requests or emails coming in that then we see a phishing email coming in and then an outbound request to the URL. That's an indicator that that's been clicked upon. So then seeing an attack within the next few weeks, that is an indicator to go off. So the earlier that you can spot and recognise those, the better chance you have of nipping it in the bud early before any damage is caused.
And these solutions, they're not hard to get hold of. They're not hard to implement. So actually something like DNS filtering, a lot of people will have firewall vendors that have a DNS filter built in.
Absolutely.
You just need to check the
turn it on. Yeah.
But it's also the ability to just easily reroute people to a DNS filtering service, reroute people to use a secondary DNS that's got a whole bunch of security built in.
Yeah.
You mentioned before, there's endpoint security tools that will apply DNS security. And then there's, specialized DNS security services. You can go out to what get commonly called DDI vendors. So that's DNS, DHCP, IP management, but as a series of things, they can build DNS security. And so there's a whole bunch of things from really straightforward to relatively complex, depending on your environment, that you can do to solve the problem. And I think, and the reason we wanted to have this chat was, I think, because we find it strange that people don't look at this and necessarily deal with that problem. Like you said before, actually, just go, oh, DNS. That's just a thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, DNS security is something that I first worked with probably, I'm going to say 12 years ago now. And when I first started working with it, I thought, wow, surely everyone's using this. And fast forward to today, there's still that people aren't sure about it. So I'm glad that we're doing a podcast on it, actually, to try and raise the awareness a little bit. But I would encourage anyone that isn't sure to reach out. You can contact us, you can contact, whoever it is. if you're working with another IT provider, speak to them about it. Essentially, make sure
to be
that
fair, you work with another IT provider. Speak to us about it. I think is a correct answer.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the information's there. Educate and learn from it. Take advantage of the resources that are open and available to you, and consider DNS.
Well, that feels like a good place to wrap up. I think, and I suppose there's one takeaway from this. I suppose the thing that you want to be asking yourself, if you're watching or listening to this show, is what are you doing about your DNS security?
Yeah.
And if you don't know the answer to that, is to probably go away and take a look at it. Yeah. Watch this back. You can watch it on 1.5 speed if you want. If you don't want to watch the whole thing, if it's too long to take 15 minutes talking about DNS, but I think it's such a crucial thing you can do, and it's a relatively simple thing to implement, relatively low cost a lot of the time, and the value is potentially really high.
Yeah, it's massive.
So I think it's well worth it. So Jason, it's been great.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks for that. And for everybody else, if you've enjoyed the show, please leave us some comments. And if you want to make sure you catch all future episodes of Tech Takeaways, then do subscribe and click like as well, because that'll help other people. Down there, I think that'll help other people to find the show and find out fascinating things about the whole world of DNS. So until next time, Jace and everybody watching, thanks for watching.